Welcome back, everyone, to the Social Work 12 podcast. I'm Taylor, and again, I'm supposed to have my co host Faith here, but she is on maternity leave, as I shared in the last episode. All is well with her and baby and Hubs. So you just have me today, but I'm super excited for our conversation today. I have Dan and Monique from Payment for Placements to chat with us about the really cool things that they're doing in New York. So we got a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. I will have Dan just share with us who you are, anything important that you want to share with everyone.
Sure. Hey, well, firstly, thank you, Taylor, so much for having us on. Monique and I are both from the New York chapter of Payment Replacements. So I'm from Brooklyn, born and raised. Before I started social work, my career was in local politics and policy and organizing. So I came to social work school with that sort of lens and background. And then really day one, when I was going to work and not getting paid for it, it ignited all the fury. Like I could not believe that a human rights-based profession was requiring unpaid work. And then also just, of course, the unsustainability of the lifestyle where I was working at my internship and then having to work because New York is expensive and I need to pay rent and school and class and all these sorts of things. So I got involved within maybe month 2 or 3 of school. And then actually it's been kind of the focus of grad school since. So I've been involved since then. I'm
Awesome.
graduating in August, which I'm stoked about.
Yay.
Congratulations, Dan.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks, y'all.
And Monique.
So, hello. So, my name is Monique Murray. I am a licensed social worker, recently graduated from a school in the Bronx, Lehman College. But I was born also and raised, worked in the Bronx. And I have always been interested in social work since I was young. However, as I got older, I took a different trajectory of how I wanted to go, but eventually wind up back at social work. And I have always been involved in helping people succeed. And it was when I took my first research and policy course as an undergraduate at Lehman College. That is when I began to understand how connected policy was to social work and how social workers can actually impact and enhance the well-being of others. And so one of the reasons why I decided to join for P4P is because the profession, when you're in the academic setting, doesn't really allow you to work. And so I remember struggling just to get Metro cards. And I can remember saying, this doesn't make sense that as a student helping to enhance the lives of other people, that I myself am struggling just to get a $2.90 Metro card. And that didn't even include lunch. And that put me on the road of trying to find a way to advocate for students like me who were going to be great social workers, but just needed some assistance to do this. And that's how I was able to find P4P.
Mm-hmm. I feel like we all have this just story of being in social work school and needing to pay our bills and it just doesn't make any sense. You know what? I could go on, but I'm really excited to have Dan and Monique here to talk with us specifically about something that I have never had any experience in, and that is getting a bill introduced. In relation to paying social work interns. So, yeah, I think Dan has an amazing presentation. Give us a little preface on what this presentation is. He's going to share his screen so people who are watching on YouTube can see. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can kind of get into this maybe after, but we started meeting a full year and a half ago and really believed that policy was the way to advance social workers getting paid, social work interns getting paid. The reason we chose that was often schools are underfunded, especially public schools that don't have money to pay their interns, and often agencies are underfunded and won't have money to pay their interns. So if our end goal is to get interns paid, we believe that it falls upon the state to do that. And so we felt that the state has a massive role to play, and therefore we needed to create policy to make that happen. So this presentation we came up with really early on to start putting this issue on the radar of electeds. And early versions of the presentation we were giving to find a sponsor, and I'm happy to talk through the process. And once we found the sponsor, now we're really shopping it around to find co-sponsors. Again, I'm happy to talk about what all that means and why it's important. And it's really to introduce someone to the issue and why we believe funding interns would help solve the issue. I'll give two prefaces and then I can pause and or jump into it. But the first preface is that we were just talking about it amongst us as social workers and social work people who have gone through that internship and talking about how horrible it is for our lives. And indeed, it really was, right? It's so unsustainable. But that is not at all the framing that we took for electeds. And it's really important to consider your audience. The framing that we took for electeds is not, oh man, it sucks to be a social work student and not get paid for it. It was, this is harmful to the state, and here's why. And I think that framing is really crucial because in New York, there's only 7,000 social workers at any given time. So sorry, social work interns at any given time. That is not a big constituency in a 20 million person state. But if you instead connect it to all of the people that social workers serve and say, we have a massive social work shortage, and if we keep this barrier in place, we're not going to have the social workers we need to provide the services that will make the state healthy. That is a very different argument, and then that perks up electeds' ears, right? So it's a very different framing. Both framings are true. It sucks for students, but it also hurts the health of the state, and that's the one that we really leaned into for when we're talking to electeds. So that's kind of preface one. And then the second preface is that we tailored it depending on who we're speaking to. So for example, if we were talking to the chair of the substance use committee, we would talk about the opioid crisis and how social workers are essential in helping manage the opioid crisis. And we need more social workers to manage this opioid crisis, therefore she should support this bill, right? So those framings are important to keep in mind because it would be different depending on who we're talking to and how it would be approached. That said, I'm happy to jump right in unless you want to ask anything.
I do have one. Or go ahead, Monique. Do you have something to say?
And I also wanted to add, people have to understand that in life we have policies or rules. They're like interchangeable. And every policy that is passed affects individuals in some way. Some people will be the beneficiary of those policies, and then some people will not be the beneficiary of those policies. And so the one thing before you will, go to political leaders and say, hey, you have to see that it's a social need, and that when you look at the demographics, that the need is actually for the majority of the people. And that's what we saw, that although it was a New York State need that interns should get paid, it was also national. And so that's the one thing you want to do. You want to make sure that what you're asking for and what you're trying to get passed is a social need, and you have the topics or the ideas to help meet that need.
Yeah, I love that. And with this presentation and for the listeners, like I just want Dan to give this just to give us a little bit of context and some talking points. And but I'm curious, when did this presentation kind of come into existence in the timeline of this process?
So we started meeting as a group with this specific idea that we want to craft a policy to get interns funded. If I had to guess, maybe January 2024, so a year and a half-ish ago. It took us probably 8-9 months to decide on the details of what the policy should do, and I will go through those ideas as well as research. There's a lot of research that went into it, both the problems and why this would help solve it. So that process took the frankly, the majority of the time. Once we had all that sort of generally consented to upon the group, then we began pitching it to legislators in, I want to say November. And we were advised, and I think it's really good advice, that finding a sponsor. So your sponsor is the person who is officially the author of the bill and who's bringing the bill to the rest of the legislator. And we were advised it's kind of like dating, where you don't want to say, I'm going with you, we're going to be married right on your first date. You want to really shop around for a while till you make that commitment. Because once you make that commitment, you are with them. They are your chief advocate. They're the person who it really is kind of a lot of power is in their hands to move the thing forward. So you want to make sure they're going to show up. You want to make sure they're going to hold the press conferences when they need to and author the bill, author the pieces they need to, and really be the advocate inside the chamber for you. So we met with electeds or their staffs, giving this presentation and having that be the jumping point or like the starting point for a conversation for probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. We met with dozens. And we all, after that process, felt really, really good about a senator named Senator Julia Salazar, who represents Bushwick and some other neighborhoods in Brooklyn. So we kind of mutually agreed that she was going to be our sponsor, and she's been phenomenal ever since. And
Yes,
since,
thank you.
yeah, thank you, Senator Salazar. And so since now we're in the process of finding co-sponsors, which I had mentioned before, which is somewhat similar in that we're going around and shopping the idea, and that's a lot less work for the elected. All they are essentially doing is writing their name, and hopefully they will show up if and when we have rallies and press conferences, but it's a lower standard there.
Okay.
So yeah, we've been giving this presentation to many people since, let's say, the November-ish timeframe.
Okay.
And I would like to also add that when we came as a group, we were forming as a group, right? So when we're doing this, trying to build policy, we have to do this forming point where we invite people who are interested in this and see who came to the table. And people came to the table. Some people had to leave the table, but we wind up with a committed group that we all took part in getting the work done. So in terms of like what Dan said about research, if I was able to do research that month, I would do research that month. And if I couldn't, somebody else was there. So we wore many hats. But the whole point was that we formed this group and we understood that we believed in the mission and that no matter what, we was going to stick with it until the end.
Yeah. I love that. So before we get into the presentation, I want to talk a little bit more about this, 8-ish month period of you guys working together and developing this policy. Is that when you were creating it? Talk to us about what those meetings look like, who was in charge, what are we doing, all the details.
Yeah. So I think that one place to start for me is the idea that when you're organizing, you're always standing on the shoulders of the people that came before you. And so I'm saying that to say, yes, we were starting from scratch, but we also weren't, right? The folks in Michigan had a bill passed, which is amazing, and we can talk about that. There's 7, 8, 9, 10-ish other bills in the country proposing in some form or some way or another that social work interns should be paid. So I don't think we would have gotten as far as we did if those other movements or those other groups hadn't come before us. And I would say what we are doing is pushing the envelope a lot further, and I'm happy to talk about why in terms of what our bill does, but it's still like they really set a foundation, right? And I think that is constantly in movement work and organizing work. You're constantly building upon the people that came before you. And it's also worth saying, like, one of the bills, as an example, is from Texas, right? Texas is a deep red state in their legislature. I'm sure obviously their population's broad swath of views, but the legislature is fairly far right to my understanding, and yet they're introducing a bill. So like there's a lot of pride in our group that we're New Yorkers, like how are we not gonna have this sort of bill that's gonna help the community when other places are. So I think that was a really strong foundation to be standing on or building off of, that it exists in other places. There's plenty of models, there's plenty of ideas. In terms of the actual meetings themselves, so yeah, it was just, we created within P4P's New York larger framework, we created a legislative working group. And so anyone in P4P and really any student or alumni who is interested in using policy as a tool to ameliorate this particular issue was welcome to join. And we'd hold meetings, and in the beginning, it was fairly open discussion of like, what should this look like specifically? What should the specific mechanisms for funding interns be? And there's a lot of questions actually when you start digging into it. And so it was, we have some advisors, some policy advisors as well. So we'd meet with them. And again, we were just, it was really a long-term discussion and also a lot of relationship building, right? Like you have to build trust when you're organizing in this way with folks. And so that was always part of our meetings, is some basic check-in, very social worky, but like, hey, how's it going with you? Let's get to know each other as full humans before we start jumping into like strong disagreements or agreements about whether we should, how we should approach this bill, right? So, yeah, and then plenty of outside work too of research. And I will say that because I had come directly from the state Senate, so I worked in the state Senate, then I went to social work school. I had a particularly, I think, useful vantage point in that I've seen the process from the other side. Like I know exactly how it all works from the legislative side. And so I got to kind of filter that knowledge into the advocacy side. And it's been really fun being on this side of it and being the one to author the bills and to kind of push it through from this angle. But I think that has also been a really crucial thing. But everyone has their own strengths and their own unique things that they're bringing to the group that has, and we would not be where we are today without truly each and every person's contribution to what's happened.
Yeah, I agree with Dan, and we are a multicultural group. So it's we were able to pull ideas from each individual. We are constantly on WhatsApp talking to one another. We leave, like Dan said, room for us to talk about our ideas, but also talk about our differences. Everything and all the time is not about it's apple pie, but because we trust each other, we were able to say, hey, this is how I'm feeling. It may not be what the majority of the group is feeling, but this is what I'm feeling. And we all listened to that and said, okay, let us look at that because maybe it's something that we did overlook. Some people think when you're in a group that everybody has to agree, but you move forward better when you have someone that says, hey, I think you should think about this. Because when you're meeting with political leaders and you're really trying to give this elevator pitch as something that you believe in, you have to be able to answer some of the questions that they may ask. So it's always good to have those differences. I would have to say for this presentation that Dan is going to talk about, our group gives him kudos for that because he actually took leadership with this and did a wonderful job with it and took everything that we talked about it and made it to the way that it was. So thank you, Dan, for your leadership with that. And that's how our group works. Like he said, there's some people that are strong in other areas. We know how to pick up where things need to be picked up when it needs to be picked up. And so I think we're an amazing, unique group. It would be beneficial that people learn that when you're forming this group, it's okay to have your differences as long as you're looking towards the same goal.
The same goal, yeah. And
So,
that goal, go ahead.
Monique, I would agree that we're an amazing and unique group. And I also would say we are not unique and anyone can do it. So I don't.
Yeah, you're right. Yes.
Like,
Anyone can do it.
I want to reverse gatekeep, as it were, that truly like anybody in any area can get together with their peers. And that's what organizing is at its most fundamental thing, getting together with your peers, discussing, hey, what's the issue and how can we figure out a solution to it, and brainstorming and working together as you can. And the most valuable resource of any group is the creative thinking and the unique perspectives and gifts of the members of that group. And so, yes, we're unique and special, and we're also not.
Yes.
Full power to all social work interns and students.
And I like and I like what Dan said about the gifts because when people forming these groups, you will use the gifts that the individual have for the benefit of the group. So, like Dan said, not to gatekeep. If someone is good at, let's say, writing an email, right? Let them do it. But the group gets to look at that email and look at it and see if it's representing, if there's a consensus with the group. And so I am very happy to be a part of this process because, like I said, I've learned what the process is to creating a bill, but to actually do it. I was
Yeah.
able to get that experience in P4P, but I
Yeah.
was exposed to that in social work school.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, at Lehman, you have to take research 1 and 2. You have to take policy 1 and 2. You have to do a capstone challenge. Um, it's mandatory that you do it.
Mm-hmm. So when you guys were meeting, the goal was to create these talking points that you're going to share with us so that you could find your first sponsor. Just boiling it down. We're doing the research to figure out really details about the problem, ideas on how we can propose to fix it, and then we're going to present.
And
Yes?
yes, and I would like to also include, like, when you're looking for the problem, you have to see if there were solutions done before. Like
Mm-hmm.
Michigan had something, so you had to look at that to see if something was done already. Was it working? Was something missed? And then you talk about that, and so look at other
Mm-hmm.
bills, and that's very important because when you're looking at other bills that are being introduced or passed, especially for a different states, you want to be able to start from somewhere, and that also, like Dan was saying, was a foundation of what we did, and then we talked about it. And then we talked about it, and we did a lot of talking about it, and we did a lot of documentation about it, so that we can always go back. So yes, those are the steps.
And the one thing that I would add, so far you've covered everything about content. A big part of it too was process, right? So if you don't know how a bill becomes a law in your state, that is also a really important thing to understand. And I'm happy to talk about it
Yeah.
generally or in New York if that would be of help. But also part of it was so after a bill is introduced, it goes to the relevant committee. And so researching all the committee members, for example, of the mental health committee or the higher education committee, understanding who all of those senators are and assembly members are, what their perspectives are, uh, and then thinking about who might be our prime sponsor, like who are we reaching out to get these meetings? How should we reach out to them? You know, all of this sort of strategic thinking around how the process is going to go also took a lot of time and a lot of conversation, as well as like once we started these meetings, ooh, we really like this senator. Ooh, we didn't get such a great vibe from this senator. Like that, those were really happening as well. And yeah, I said really trying to be as strategic as possible around who we could get to be our prime sponsor, because once you stick in, you're stuck in, right? And so like thinking about how the bill was going to move, who kind of what the power rankings within the Senate and
Yeah.
Assembly are, and kind of how the all power works within Albany in the New York context. So there was a lot of process talk as well to get
Yeah.
ourselves there.
Yeah. That's a good point. Like, you really need to understand, like you said, how is a bill introduced and passed so that you can be prepared to when you're going to talk to your legislators. Um, and you had experience. It sounds like you had some other people who have policy experience. Who are those people? Where did you find them to kind of like consult with you guys and support through this process too?
So internally, we had some experience both from social work school, but also someone actually just came on who's had a lot of experience advocating for different bills. So there was internal experience, and then externally, uh, we have a network of professors, which is helpful, and we called upon
Mm-hmm.
them. And then we are also part of something called the Advocacy Institute, which is a really amazing resource where we can consult with someone who's a professional organizer, and we do that actually quite often. So that's been really helpful. And this person worked in the state assembly for a decade plus, and so really understands kind of the inner workings of Albany. And so that we've had many, many meetings with him at crucial moments, and that's been really helpful as well.
Wow, this Advocacy Institute, is this only in New York or this is a national thing?
I believe it's national, but don't quote me on that.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I'll put that link in the show notes. Okay. So, yeah, understanding how the bill works, yeah, all that. Researching, you get your talking points. We need to find a sponsor. We create this presentation.
Mhm. And then
Right.
with the sponsor too, there was some back and forth, right? Like it's not we came in with a pretty formed bill, but we also wanted it to be collaborative. So we that in and of itself started a whole new process of do you all have any ideas of, anything we should put in this bill that isn't already? We met with the Office of Mental Health, and actually that created a couple new points as well. So it's not, I mean, now at this point, and you can actually still always amend it, but it was a very iterative process, like constantly
Hmm.
building, changing, and creating. And yeah.
Yeah. And you guys had to come, I mean, even before you found your sponsor, you guys had to come with a draft of the bill to kind of present.
Essentially, yes, with its core ideas.
With,
Although it,
right, with the
yeah,
core ideas. And we had to meet, like sometimes we were doing meetings like what, 10 times, 10 times plus a month. And if I couldn't make it, the other groups would make it, but we always made sure somebody was there.
Yeah.
We were always planning to make sure, practicing. And so um, we were doing all of that, but constantly meeting with political leaders, listening to their feedback, taking their feedback, going back to
yep.
going back to the drawing board or the idea board and saying, okay, they said this. What does that mean? Where can we put it? Should we put it somewhere? So there was a lot of information going back and forth, a lot of knowledge being disseminated to us, being transferred to us, and then we go back and we see what we could do with it.
Hmm. And it makes a little bit more sense to me, Dan, when earlier you were saying, we're standing on the shoulders of other people who have done this. And so because you have to kind of create your own bill, you have others that you can look at to see what did they put
Hmm.
in it? Do we like that? Do we not like that? Like
Hmm.
how do we kind of use theirs to create ours? Yeah. So you're not
Also,
scratch.
yeah,
You should never start from scratch, but I mean,
yeah.
sometimes you may have to, but
Yeah.
part of the research policy is to check to see if the issue that you think is an issue has it been solved, because
Yeah.
if you're speaking with political leaders and it's already solved, it's like you're wasting your time and their time. So you want to see if these things exist.
This is a really nitty-gritty thing, but maybe worth mentioning if anyone's feeling overwhelmed by the thought of having to write a bill.
Yeah.
You don't. So my guess would be every state. Certainly how it works in New York is there's a bill drafting division. So they're the ones that actually turn it into legalese. So all you have to send them the actual
Right.
mechanics. So like this bill should do this thing and this thing and this thing, but you are not responsible for actually drafting it into legal bill language. Just to reduce that sort of. So
Okay.
once you agree with what the bill should do in sort of as close concept as you can with your sponsor, then they send it over to bill drafting. Bill drafting returns it in legal language. You have a final check. And then once everything looks good to you, everything looks good to the sponsor, then they officially introduce it. Then it would go to committee, which is where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to pass through committee, which means, usually however many senators are on that committee. So now we're in the process of trying to move it through committee. And once it moves through committee, it would pass through the full chamber, has to reach a majority vote for the chamber. In New York, there's two chambers, lower and upper, Assembly and Senate, just like US Congress, right? Congress and Senate has to pass through both in identical versions. So that's its own potential challenge. And to bring it to the floor, there's usually a Senate leader and a leader of each chamber, just like in the US
Okay.
House. And they're really the power broker. So like you have to get to them to bring it to the floor to even see a vote. And a lot of bills die that way, just they never bring it to the floor. So really important. So that's at some point going to be a crux of where we are going.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the Senate leader is supportive of what we're doing. We've had a meeting with her a year ago, so that's huge. And then ultimately to the governor's desk for signing. So there's many steps here. Like there's the actual policy writing, and there's sort of the iterative process that we're going through. But there's also a lot of organizing and advocacy work and movement building to build enough pressure to actually get it through the process. So, session ends in 8 days, no one or something like that. No one is under any illusion that it's going to pass this year. This is going to be a multi-year challenge, but potentially. But this is the work. This is what it takes. And again, and like we will set this bar, hopefully, And then again, hopefully a future generation will come and raise that bar 20 more levels so that we keep advancing the field forward.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's get into the presentation.
Okay. So let me share my screen here. We've hit on a lot of the topics actually, and I may do some editorializing, but okay. So sorry, I'll pause here. All right. So here's our presentation. This again is designed for someone who essentially knows nothing about our issue. So we would start, I'll actually skip this because it feels fairly obvious, but we start with just a brief who we are, and then a brief background, right? That we have 900 hours of unpaid internship to graduate, and that it's generally unpaid, and we do all sorts of stuff. So we kind of give that background. As said up front, we frame the problem not as a problem only for the students, although we don't shy away from that, but as a problem for the state. And we hit upon three major things. One is the social work shortage, two is demographics, and three is debt. So those are kind of like the statewide macro issues that we're saying paying interns will solve. So starting with social work shortages, and again, this is research from New York in specific, so whoever is replicating this would need to do research for their context. So social workers are relevant and I would say essential in all sorts of fields, all sorts of crises that New York State is facing. We have an aging population, we have an opioid crisis, which is true everywhere. We have a homelessness crisis. We have a pretty desperate mental health care shortage. And so what we're seeing is that the demand for social workers is rising while the supply of new social workers is not matching it. So it is up to the state. We need to figure out a way to create a pipeline to reduce barriers so that we have enough social workers to deal with all of the macro issues that social workers help to ameliorate. So some data on this. This is a US stat from a few years ago, and maybe even more severe now. By 2030, we're going to be 200,000 workers, social workers short, which is a pretty intense shortage. In New York specifically, 48 of the counties in New York out of 62 counties have moderate to severe mental health care shortages, so pretty much all of New York's counties don't have access to the mental health care that they need. In terms of schools, 95% of our school districts don't have the recommended ratio of a school social worker per 250 students. So we're already seeing intense shortages in New York. And something that we really like to highlight is that social work shortages aren't affecting everyone equally. Considering the work that we do, the social work shortages have the gravest consequences on vulnerable populations, right? So our core pitch is that for the health of the state, if the state wants to deal with these macro crises, we need more social workers. And how do we get more social workers? We need to reduce the barriers, of which unpaid internships feels like the most obvious. Okay, so that's kind of social work shortage, point one. Moving to representation in the field. So this is CSWE data, Council on Social Work Education. So the majority of new social workers, the majority of social work students are white, whereas if you compare that to the majority of the clients served, this is specific to New York at the very least, the majority of clients served are people of color, 80-20 in terms of the ratio, right? So requiring students to work for free creates these financial barriers that really filters down who is going to enter the profession. This is true for race. This is also true for class. And there's plenty of stats we can look at about that, sort of the demographic mismatches between new social workers and clients served. And then there's also the gender equity piece, which is, so I think last year, 84%, a full 84% of social work students were female identified, right? So we think about this too in a gender context, in that the lack of pay for interns is rooted in these larger systems of patriarchy and the just routine devaluing of work that's deemed as feminized labor, like all care work, really. So one of the pitches that we make, especially depending on the elected and depending on kind of what they tend to care about or the committees that they're on, is that if we care about gender equity, if we are really wanting to work towards equal pay for equal work, this would be a historic investment in feminized labor and could push that needle forward towards equity. So those are the first two. It also felt important to get student voices in the room. Granted, we are students talking about it, but so we did a survey just to get some, how is this impacting the students themselves? 74% of students said that it's unpaid internships is it affecting their academics, which is highly ironic because the point of internships is to aid in academics. We can get into that specific point if you're interested, but 94% of the students we surveyed said it's impacting their mental health. And then about 94 as well, of course, how could it not be, said it's an impact on their finances. And then we asked a qualitative question. How has it impacted your life? Just kind of open-ended. And we got pages and pages and pages of response. And truly reading through those responses are devastating. They are true, like reading how it's impacted people's lives is really intense. So we pulled just a couple of quotes to highlight here. I live paycheck to paycheck. I've considered dropping out, right? Which then goes back to the social work shortages idea. It's caused extreme stress and depression. I've thought twice about buying meals on days I commute, right? So really intense life. Oh, it's caused severe psychological distress, financial strain, pressure on my relationships, et cetera. So we got pages of feedback like this. Okay, so then moving on from student experience, we talk about student debt. So student debt has generally been rising just from the MSW degree alone. And you can't divorce that student debt from race and gender. So we see that the students with lowest levels of debt are generally white, generally men. Students with higher debts are generally people of color, generally female identified, et cetera. So considering all these issues that not paying interns cause, the solution for us feels fairly clear, which is we need to get social work interns paid for the health of the state. As we've talked about on this podcast already, this is not a new idea, that this is actually being introduced and there's movement around it all over the country. And we link bills directly from other states in this presentation, then send them along to people we're talking to show all of the different models, all of the different ways that this could look or has looked in other states. And really highlighting the diversity of states here, from Texas to New Mexico to Massachusetts, radically different prevailing ideologies in those places, all pushing this idea forward. The one to highlight, the one that's passed among the most important, this bill from Michigan, which you've featured on your podcast, which is compensating MSW interns at public schools at $25 an hour. We also look at, there's kind of parallel contexts here that we recognize we're not the only ones that have to do unpaid labor to get their degree. So kind of another example of this same idea is 2 years ago now, Maryland passed a bill to provide Masters of Education students a $20,000 stipend during their student teacher year. So they were dealing with the exact same thing, that during their Masters of Ed, they had to put in a year of unpaid labor. And what Maryland saw was they were dealing, again, just like social work, with a shortage of teachers and a teacher pool that was not reflective to the students that they were teaching. And so to deal with those issues, they said, we have to fund the student teacher year, and that indeed did pass. So this then goes to this next slide. A big question is, well, how do we know it's going to work? How do we know that funding social work interns is actually going to deal with the issues you're talking about? And the bills I just mentioned are too new to have any significant data from. So the best parallel example that we could think of was the passage of Medicare for doctors, the passage of funding doctor residents in the physician context. So here, currently residents are paid for their residency years. Before 1965, they were not. And so what we saw before 1965 was we had a massive shortage of doctors in the US. With the passage of Medicare, residents began getting funded, and the number of doctors in America skyrockets. And for those who are not watching on YouTube and just listening to the podcast, the bar graph just goes straight up, essentially right after this bill passes. And so the lesson learned feels fairly clear. If you fund it, the people will come. that yes, it is a different context, right? That yes, residents are, after they graduate, they're not students. Yes, it's a different field. But still, you went from an unpaid requirement in your training program to a paid requirement in your training program. And all of a sudden, we had a massive explosion of people entering that field. And this is true internationally too. The countries that are paying their doctors during residency have much better physician to population ratios than countries that do not. There's international data on that as well as national. So what this looks like in New York specifically. So in New York, there are about 5,000 MSW students, about 1,200 BSW students. So that's in terms of the actual specifics of how many people we're saying should be compensated for their labor. There's a lot of different bill models out there, as I just went through before. All of those bill models are amazing and wonderful, and I'm so grateful that they exist. And yet we wanted to push it forward in really a few key ways. So generally the bill models that exist are targeted funding, meaning, for example, the Michigan bill, which I mentioned, is funding MSW interns at public schools only. That's really important. That's a crucial step. And yet it's only one segment of the population, of the intern population. Other bills, for example, targeted by demographics. So if you are low income, if you're a person of color, this sort of thing, you can apply for funding. It's not automatic, and they can fund you, right? So again, wonderful bills, and I'm very glad they exist. Because social work is a human rights-based profession, we really felt that all interns should be paid, period. And that is stemming from, I guess, a few different points. One is that just all labor has value. And so the idea that what we are doing has no value is a fallacy, and it should be compensated because it is labor. So there's that component. And the other component is that we believed we're talking about these larger crises, right? And the larger social work shortages and all these things. And we think the best way to fully kick open the doors of the profession is by guaranteeing funding to all people, to all social work students who enter the field. So we have been pretty adamant about that since early on. Again, building on what's been done before us, but kind of taking it to a new step. And hopefully when we take it to that new step, someone else can take it to a further new step, right? So that was our, again, through months and months of conversation, that's kind of where we landed. So we started with that preface. Now, when you do the math for all of that, meaning every social work student to get funded full living wage for the entirety of the degree, it's something like a $75 million cost to the state. On the one hand, that's our state budget is $220 billion, and that's a drop in the bucket. And certainly, I think there is an argument to be made that that is an investment and that is preventative. That if the more social workers you have, it'll actually save the state money down the road. And I believe that argument fully. And yet, we have the federal administration we have, we're in the budget context we have. And so we came in with that idea, and we were committed to that idea. And then the feedback we got very consistently is that from a political viability standpoint, we don't believe that's a viable bill. And so this then kind of sent us back, not fully to the drawing board because we knew our principles, but it did make us rethink. And so ultimately what we landed on, the bill that is now in writing, is a pilot program bill of 4 years. That is a reduced funding bill. So it's not for the full degree, it's for just half of the degree. Not ideal, but it's what we could agree on. It's still for all students. So by nature of entering the degree program, you will get paid. And the idea is that so all students will get funded, and after 4 years, the Office of Mental Health is going to have to study the impacts of that funding. And so ideally, this bill paves the way for a future bill that is full funding for the entire degree at a full living wage, right? So this is kind of the stepping stone to that later bill that we'll propose 4 years down the road. while still modeling what we want the full bill to be.
Can I add something, Zan?
Of course.
So, in terms of the bill provision, and we had to go back and check. Earlier I said, when you're selecting policies and bills, there's always going to be a group that will benefit and then a group that doesn't benefit. And that's what we are seeing here, that we wanted to be able to benefit the whole. But what happens is that when you go in to speak with your political leaders who are experts about what's going on and they're looking at the budget, they'll give you this information to have you go back and to look at that. And one of the things that is challenging about creating bills, especially surrounded by social work or interns, is that the history of it. Where did it come from? And it was always based on, well, you work for free, right? But the reality is that it may be appropriate to work for free for someone who is financially stable. We do not want students who are not financially stable to not be able to avail of this degree, because we live in a country of pursuit of happiness, the Declaration of Independence, that all men should be able to pursue what makes them happy. And if social work is a passion for someone, it should not be that because they are financially unstable, they shouldn't do this. So this was one of the things we were debating. And we want the bill to go forward, but we knew that we had to meet our political leaders halfway. And so that's why Dan is saying what he's saying, because we, again, are looking at the bigger picture. We have to start somewhere, right? Rather than start nowhere. We have to start somewhere and hope that it will build. And so that, I say this to say that to people who are thinking about policies and thinking about laws, don't let a law just stop you. If you see something and you think that it should be better, you should look to see who is the sponsor. You should make appointments with them and see how you can enhance that. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Monique.
So
I have
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm almost done with this, and then we can open it up to whatever else. So this is the last slide, to just going over how we did our bill in the end. So it's 4 years. That is 2 cohorts. We also were, how long of the study was a kind of back and forth for a while. We thought, shorter and it's hard to show trends, longer and it just prolongs this whole thing and also is more money to the state without evidence that it's working. So for a couple of reasons, we went with a 4-year pilot. And the study itself looks at a few things. And really the goal of the study is to prove that this funding is essential to helping ameliorate the things that we talked about earlier in the presentation. So things like enrollment data is, now that we have money for interns, does the amount of social work students go up? And for this, actually, one of the ways that we buffered it in the bill to kind of help ensure that we do see more students is that social work schools who receive funding for their students have to do a awareness campaign that they have funding, right? So this is one of the ways that we're really trying to push us actually showing the number of social workers go up, is schools will now be doing campaigns. Hey, if you come to school right now, you're gonna get funded for your internship, where if you come later, you're gonna have to work for free, as a way to actually prove, show that, hey, funding will increase. So we wrote that provision into the bill. Does it change demographic data, right? Who is applying to schools? Who's going to schools? Does it change dropout rates? Are there less students dropping out because now they're getting funded? Does it change application rates? Does it, and we talked about this, Taylor, I think off beforehand, but does it impact wages, right? So one of the things that we believe is social work is notoriously a low-wage profession, which I think created this podcast in the first place, is for you to look at that very thing. And does starting the field and being told your labor has essentially no value because we're not paying you for it, that depresses wages down the field, right? And so does getting paid since day one ultimately lift the floor for everybody? And now we see downfield impacts of social workers down the road refusing low wages or negotiating higher salaries or just getting paid higher salaries systemically. So, and a cost benefit analysis, right? So yes, we're asking the state to put in a lot of money, but as said, does it save money in, let's say, emergency room visits or other downstream impacts, right? So we put all these lengthy study criteria into the bill. We also put a criteria just to make it more likely that if you receive this funding, you agree to stay in the state for a year after in a social work capacity. So to show the state like, hey, you're going to reap a return on your investment. And there are a couple other provisions in the bill as well, but I think those are probably the core ones. And that's kind of it. So we introduce the issue, we go through the provisions of the bill, and then open it up for conversation. And yeah.
Yeah. Can you say the part of what you're actually proposing in terms of the money? Because I know you talked about, you know, the funding the whole program would be 75 million, but you had to reduce it down to.
Yeah. So this was a very challenging part for us, right? So understanding the political viability and like wanting to see something passed while also not compromising our morals, and how do those things sit in tension? So we're currently, for this pilot program, asking for about $12 million a year. And we got it down to that number in a few ways. One is the full funding, and we believe this, is that both BSWs and MSWs should be paid for their intern labor. And that is where we want to go, there's no doubt. For this bill, we just wrote it in for MSWs. BSWs have to work for 400 hours, whereas MSWs have to work for 900 hours. So removing that BSW pool, not long-term, but for the sake of this particular bill, was something we did. And also, I think part of the thinking there was, if it's to enter the field, you have to go through your MSW anyway, right? Then either way, anyway. So that was hard decision, but that's what we did, along with cutting it from both years to 1 year. So those are some of the decisions that we had to make. Neither one was easy. And hopefully, as said, this bill lays the groundwork for then BSWs and MSWs getting paid for both years, which is, again, in the context of New York, in the $70 million range.
Yeah. And I agree with Dan. It hurt my heart when we had to look at the undergraduates, because I was actually an undergraduate student, and I was able to apply to an MSW program as an advanced standing student. But we also noticed that those students, if they continue and wanted to pursue their MSW, then they would have been in that pile. But so again, I would say when people decide that they want to look at a policy, they want to introduce a bill that they think is going to really help with social issues, that is just a part of the process of saying, hey, this is something we believe, but now how do we massage it? How do we make it work? But constantly recognizing that there's always a way to amend it or make it better.
Yeah. Monique, can you share with us where you guys are at now? What's going on, the update with the bill and looking forward?
So just like Dan said, right now we're looking on having co-sponsors. The more co-sponsors we have, the better. Getting ready to speak about more appearance, or also getting our P4P members ready to also bring awareness to this bill, and making it more public, making it more strong. And that is all about community organizing and advocacy. That also in itself is a little challenging, because you need the masses of people, but P4P, we have always been a strong, committed body, and we always showed up when we needed to, and this will be another opportunity that we can display that. Did I miss anything, Dan, about it?
No, I think the only thing that's worth mentioning is just that it was just introduced officially 2 weeks ago, despite months and months of back and forth. But there's a lot of language, tailoring. And so it's like, even though it's been in the pipeline now for probably since January, we've essentially had the language. It's only official as of May 13th. So it's actually brand new, and legislative session in New York is only from January to June. And then the other 6 months, there's no session. Other states may work differently. So
no work is going to be done on it until
on our end. We're still working.
So it can't pass. It can't go anywhere off
Mhm.
during those off months, but you can still amass co-sponsors. You can still meet with senators and
Okay.
electeds. Like there's still a lot to there's you could still get press. You could still keep
Okay.
growing the momentum.
Yeah.
So all
Okay.
the work is very much still going to continue, but the legislative session ends in
Mhm.
2 weeks,
Okay.
something like this. So
And
But we met our deadline because we wanted to have that bill number before everything ends. And
oh, awesome.
yeah, and that's what we did. But we are exceptionally grateful for Senator Salazar for introducing the bill and her team. They worked with us. They gave us feedback. I was amazed of how they really took us seriously. They believed in the bill and they just allowed us to work with them. And I'm so grateful for them. So thank you. If anyone on Team Salazar, Senator Salazar is hearing this, thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I guess my last question is, if everything went how you guys wanted to go, when would you guess that this bill would be passed? How long does this take? Because you
yeah,
guys have already been working for what, a year and a half about?
yeah, but it has only been public for 2 weeks. So in like the real
Right.
world terms, it's actually
On
2 weeks
time.
old. Yeah, but in all the behind the scenes work, it's been a lot.
What important?
Yeah.
You know what? And I was talking to someone and I was explaining to them about the bill has been introduced. And I was explaining to them we were working on this about a year and a half, and they were like, "That's pretty good timing because,
Wow.
yeah, that's pretty good timing because you really have to go through the process of finding a, a a sponsor that would believe in the bill, but also they already have a foundation of something that you already shared. So sometimes it takes time. I wouldn't say what is that it should happen at this time, it shouldn't happen this time. I think when you're in a group and you decide when you would like to see this done, that will determine if you are on time or you're behind. And I think for us, we did pretty well in timing.
Yeah, I think so too. I think one thing to say, I mean, on the optimistic side of town, mental health is politically popular right now at least in New York, but like the
Totally.
governor is constantly talking about how she's investing in mental health and how that's anytime she talks about public safety, she talks about mental health. Like it's just in the political ecosystem constantly. And what we are saying is, look, you're talking about mental health all the time and you're funding mental health initiatives, but you're not funding worker training or education. Exactly. You're not creating the pipeline necessary. There's this huge missing link. If you want the state to have mental health services, you need the people who can supply it. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's actually a really strong opportunity for that exact reason. That there's, again, this like kind of political momentum. That said, we are also in very trying political times, as we all know. And so it's really hard to put a timeline on when this will pass. Obviously, ideally sooner than later, but I think also part of it is kind of up to us, right? I think one thing in terms of how much momentum can we build, how many endorsing organizations, how many big names can we get saying we need to do this, which we're working on very actively. And the more momentum we build, the more pressure that the electeds feel, the more likely it's going to pass sooner than later. So
yeah. Monique, did you want to add something?
No.
Okay.
I believe I did, but it may come back.
Okay. Well, I think that was a great conversation, and thank you both for joining us and sharing your knowledge, because this is obviously very important, all things. And go ahead.
Now I know what I was going to say. Yeah. So I wanted to say for social work students who are interested in advocacy, I think that's great. But for students who may not think that they should take advocacy or policy, I would say take a course in policy, because when you're doing direct practice, you may see out of your many clients the same issue occurring, right? And what policy and research allows you to do is ethically and morally be able to research the issues and the solutions. And then, speak with politicians or speak on your job about how you can enhance the life beings of others. So if your college doesn't say that research and policy is a mandated course that you need to take, but you can take it, I would suggest that you do, because you never know when you may need it when you're dealing with direct practice, because every policy, every rule is going to impact your client no matter what. If there's about SNAP benefits, it's going to affect your clients. If it's about mental health, every bill. We don't do anything without rules and regulations. And so it's very important for social workers to do that. The other thing I wanted to say is that social workers are unique in that we can provide direct services. We can do community advocacy. We can do community organizing. We can actually refer clients to resources. So when people say, well, why social workers are needed, we're needed because we can do all of these things and also provide direct care. We are a complex, but we're also versatile. We don't just do mental health, right? We can do mental health, but if we see our clients need resources and they need advocacy, we are taught how to do that as well. And then we're also governed by the NASW, the National Association of Social Workers. So there is a way we are taught to work and handle and collaborate with the people in the communities that we serve, right? So this would make social work very important, understanding individuals and how the environment impacts the individuals. And so that's why I believe in the profession of social work. I believe that we are doing great things. And this bill helps support individuals who want to go out and do this good work.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing to that? I know we're trying to wrap up, but I think, so Monique, I fully agree with everything you said. I think the unique contribution of social work is the person environment framework. And there's a lot of students I have interacted with that are clinician focused, and that's great. And we need more clinicians, but I do think, as you're saying, kind of policy is a way to help alleviate suffering on a structural level.
Yes.
And I think those things are so interconnected. So there's that. But the second thing I want to say is that we're talking about how it took us a year and a half and how there's so much work ahead, and all of that is true. It's been a very challenging undertaking. And I don't want that to intimidate anybody. Like there's a joy in the work that, like, connecting with other students and saying, like, oh, I'm not crazy. Like, it's not just me that is freaking out that I'm not getting paid. Like, it is actually incredibly normal.
Yeah.
Is actually just profoundly even healing. I would use that word. So, and there's joy in community and joy in feeling like, oh, wait, we can solve this problem, that others coming behind me don't have to deal with what I dealt with. So I'd want to provide that encouragement. And I'd also want to provide, if policy feels like too big of a fish to fry, or if you're in a state where it just feels that right away the political viability is slim, there are other ways that you can impact students here and now. And you've featured this on your show, and I'm sure we'd be happy to come back and talk about things, but reducing hours alignment campaign. So you're reducing how many hours you're working for free. Reducing your credit hours, meaning you're not having to pay so much for your internship. Mandating that you get sick time so you don't have to go to your internship while you're unwell. Mandating that you get lunchtime, right? There's all sorts of ways to impact right here and now on a more local level if that feels more manageable. So I hope that other states will pursue policy, and yet if that feels like too unmanageable, there are ways you can organize today and much smaller fish, but incredibly important nonetheless. So I'd want to encourage folks in that way too.
Understand. And P4P is always looking for new members. So the email, our email and website could be listed below.
Show notes.
And if you're interested, we would love to have you.
Yes. Love it. Dan and Monique, thank you so much. I feel like we talked about so much, and there's still so much about this that we can talk about. So maybe we'll have a future conversation. But thanks everyone for listening, and we will be back in 2 weeks.